Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to all of you. Okay, today we're gonna learn and discuss about ecological and biogeochemical functions and dynamic. There are four objectives for this lecture. Number one is aquatic communities. What are the elements in the aquatic communities? For example, lake and stream. What are the elements and what are the contents in the food web? Energy flow and chemical cycles, which are carbon cycles, nitrogen cycles, phosphorus cycle, and some of the toxic compounds. What is community? Community is a list of species or taxa present in a specific area. Community is a group that have ecological interaction. What are community structure? There are some categories that can be included in the community structure, which is diversity, which consists of indices or index. What are the dominant species, for example? What are the species richness or evenness? The distribution or the zonation, the productivity that can be biomass or carbon assimilation, the abundance or maybe the density of some species, the size or the sexes. In community structure, there are interaction of community with biotic and abiotic elements. You should know how to differentiate between biotic and abiotic elements. The lake communities are based on major habitat. In this slide, there are four habitats that might have different communities. Number one is pelagic zone. Pelagic zone is here. It's an open water area that usually consists plankton or nekton. The littoral zone is a shallow water near shore, which usually inhabited by aquatic macrophytes and organisms that live on or among plants. There is also benthic area or benthic zone, which is located at the bottom of the lake, usually consists of heterotrophic organisms. There is also Aufwuchs, is around here. It consists of periphyton, which is 1 millimeter thick slime layer attached to stone, sediments, aquatic macrophytes in the littoral zone. The stream communities can also depend on water velocities and light shedding. There are 6 habitats from top to down of the stream. Number 1 is cascade, is here. Number 2 is falls. Number 3 is pools, which the flow is very minimum and the turbulence is very few, which is very favorable for the benthos. Number 4 is run. It's a very high velocity area with a smooth flow. Number 5 is riffle. It's a very turbulent, very fast flowing water over substrate that and also consists of high DO. Usually this area inhabited by fish and benthos. There is also number 6, it's called backwaters. It's a pool outside the main channels. What is food web? It shows who is eating what. It's a biological communities within lakes can be organized conceptually into food chains and food webs. It describes the trophic and ecological interaction of organisms within an ecosystem. If the species that eat the same food, there are potential competitors. This ecological pyramid shows the energy flow, which is the organization of organisms and non-living materials within an ecosystem. In this pyramid, the primary producers support the overlying levels. However, consumers can shift level throughout their life cycles. The energy source from the ecological pyramid, it can be from within the pyramid, which called autochthonous, also can be from outside the pyramid. It's called allochthonous. Food webs also recognize the different roles species play. There are 3 main groups of species that is playing role in the food web. Number 1 is producers. Producers. They can generate food through photosynthesis. There are also consumers that consist of primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. The decomposers, they feed on the dead tissue and return nutrients and energy. This image describes the flow of energy and nutrient, which consists of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, which begin with photosynthesis by primary producers. What are primary producers? Primary producers are consist of algae and macrophytes, where the roots and floating, especially in the littoral zone. I hope you know where is the littoral zone. What are algae? Algae can be suspended algae, which are phytoplankton. Phytoplankton can be divided into several groups, namely green algae, diatoms, dinoflagellates, and cyanobacteria. There are also attached algae, which is periphyton. Cyanobacteria can create blooms in eutrophic lakes. I hope you already know what is eutrophic. What are cyanobacteria? All plants absorb nitrate and ammonium from water for growth. Some cyanobacteria can fix nitrogen gases from atmosphere, dissolve in water, and convert it to ammonium that maintain high rates of growth compared to the other algae. A few species can adjust their buoyancy according to the light conditions and nutrient supply. Cyanobacteria are well adapted to phosphorus deficiency because it is able to store excess phosphorus when available. Cyanobacteria is less suitable for consumption of primary consumers due to its gelatinous matrix, and they can produce chemicals that inhibit crases and also toxin, which is known as cyanotoxin. Some groups or some genera that are potentially produce cyanotoxin are from Anabena and Microcystis. Consumers consist of primary consumer, which are zooplankton that graze on bacteria, algae, and detritus. The secondary consumer are planktivorous fish, predaceous invertebrates that eat zooplankton, and the tertiary consumer, which consists fish or carnivorous animals that prey on smaller fish. Consumers can also comes from benthic organisms, which are invertebrates and bottom-feeding fish, and they are major consumers and important recyclers of nutrients. What are decomposers? Decomposers include bacteria, fungi, and other microorganisms. They feed on the remains of aquatic organisms, break down organic matter into inorganic state. Some of decaying material is recycled as nutrient, for example, phosphate, ammonium, carbon dioxide, or methane gas in anoxic zone. Decomposers are dominant in hypolimnion and cause depletion of DO, also known as agnosia. And agnosia will affect the chemistry and the biology of the lake. This is the second part of the objective of this topic is the chemical cycles, which consists of carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle, and some of the toxic chemicals. Concentration of oxygen and carbon dioxide in waters provide a measure for organic production and decomposition. The distribution of carbon is low in epilimnion, which is used for photosynthesis, and high in hypolimnion, which is used for respiration and decomposition. To measure total inorganic carbon, which are carbonic acid, bicarbonate, or carbonate, we can use titration or gas analyzers. The importance of carbon in the environment that they can affect water chemistry, which is dissolved in organic carbon buffer against rapid changes in pH. The carbon can also contribute in photosynthesis and acid deposition in water bodies through rainwater. The carbon can also threat human health. You can read the case about Lake Nyos in Cameroon for further information. There are four main sources of carbon. Number one is from diffusion from atmosphere. Number two is from photosynthesis and respiration. Number three is pH and the carbonate bicarbonate equilibrium. And number four is from anaerobic decomposition produced methane. The pH controls the chemical state of many lake nutrients, including carbon dioxide, phosphate, ammonia, iron, and trace metal. This is the reversible chemical reaction, which you can see here. Okay, this is the reversible chemical reaction between carbon dioxide dissolved, carbon dioxide gases, carbonic acid, bicarbonate, and carbonate. Inorganic carbon equilibrium is the major pH buffering system for lake and stream. This figure shows the changes in three forms of inorganic carbon in a lake with changes in pH. Note that the usual pH range in lakes Bicarbonate is most abundant. Carbon dioxide is the most abundant at low pH, while carbonate dominates in high pH condition. About 35% of the total inorganic carbon can be found as bicarbonate at pH 6, but this fraction rise to 95% at pH 8. Algae and higher plants mostly use only carbon dioxide, so little usable carbon dioxide can be found in eutrophic lake surface waters. This is the carbon cycle. It's a simplified carbon cycle. I will show you the more comprehensive carbon cycle later. Nitrogen in the aquatic ecosystem. Most of the nitrogen are in the form of nitrogen gas. Nitrate, ammonium, nitrate, and urea are less abundant but more important for biological demand. Nitrogen cycles in gases, soluble and particulate form that can be found in oxic and anoxic condition. Availability of various nitrogen compounds influences the variety, abundance, and nutritional value of aquatic plants and animals. Nitrate is the most common form of combines inorganic nitrogen in lakes and streams. Concentration and supply related to land use practices on the watershed. These are the list of importance of nitrogen. All proteins contain nitrogen. Enzymes are protein. Therefore, nitrogen is important for biochemical reaction. Living matters contain 5% nitrogen. However, nitrate and ammonia are not always adequate in natural waters. This limits plant growth, especially in warm climates. How to measure nitrogen? Number one, we can use traditional chemical analysis that can measure nitrate, ammonia, and organic nitrogen. We can use specific ion electrodes, which can detect moderate to high levels, which is more than 1 milligram per liter in organic nitrogen. We can also use acid digestion or automatic analyzer that can measure organic nitrogen. We can also use mass spectrometry or gas chromatography to measure dissolved nitrogen. These are the complex nitrogen cycles. Nitrogen gas are fixed by plants or bacteria through fixation. The nitrogen gas can also fix by non-living process from lightning. And then from plants and bacteria, they also fed on animals. And the animal produce excretion in the form of ammonium. You can read and observe these nitrogen cycles and understand the processes. The details of the processes will be shown later. This is the nitrogen cycle in freshwater aquatic ecosystem. The thick black lines indicate the main pathways in the terms of mass transfer. The dotted lines through those involving recycling and mineralization in the water column. Most biological available nitrogen is present as nitrate, which passes from acid to rivers and lakes, where much of it is taken up by algae used for growth and deposited in the sediments. Nitrogen in algae eaten by zooplankton in lake and insect larvae like benthos and streams is excreted as ammonia, which is cycled back to algae in the summer. Note the two anoxic sections of the cycle and fixation and denitrification, which involve blue-green algae and bacteria. In contrast to the rest of the cycles that occurs under oxygenated conditions, most nitrogen gas fixation occurs in the plankton, whereas most denitrification occurs in the sediments, especially in estuaries and wetlands. Most organic nitrogen in aquatic ecosystem, plants or animals nitrogen and organic detritus is called particulate or dissolved organic nitrogen or DON, DON. These are the major biological processes in the nitrogen cycles. Number one is nitrogen gas fixation. There are two processes, which is living and non-living. In living process, blue-green algae can fix nitrogen gas using heterotrophic cell. In the non-living process, lightning process is involved. Number two is denitrification, which consists nitrate is changed to nitrogen gases. It occurs at low oxygen in sediments, wetlands, and hypolimnion by bacteria. It is very important for nitrogen budget in lakes, wetlands, streams, and estuaries. Number three is denitrification, which consists the changes from ammonium to nitrate. In this process, it consumes oxygen in the oxic condition by bacteria. Process number four is assimilation, which involves dissolved inorganic nitrogen organic compound by algae and bacteria, which consists ammonium or nitrate or higher plants nitrate only. Number five is excretion by animals and recycled nitrogen back to plant. Which form of excretion is toxic? Ammonia, highly toxic and water soluble. Urea is less toxic that contain carbon. Uric acid is not toxic, insoluble in water, and have large organic molecules. This figure shows the nitrification and denitrification in lake or estuarine sediments. Detritus or detritus, such as dead algae and fish, contain organic nitrogen, which undergoes decomposition with ammonia released as a bacteria waste product. This ammonia is rapidly oxidized to nitrate by other bacteria in the oxic upper mud since this is an energy producing reaction. The nitrate can then diffuse either up to the water column or down to the anoxic region where it is denitrified, releasing nitrogen gas, which diffuses up to the water. Complete anoxia is not needed for denitrification. One reason it is a very common process. Nitrate and nitrate. Nitrate is the most abundant form in organic in lakes and streams. Nitrate is partially reduced form of nitrate. Plants and algae have enzyme, namely nitrate reductase and nitrate reductase to use nitrate. Major sources of nitrogen for lakes is nitrate in rainfall, runoff from agriculture and sewage discharges. Ammonia and ammonium. Rapid uptake by algae but also excreted by aquatic animals. They have toxic effect due to pollution at high pH and temperature. The sources of these two are rivers, rainfall, atmospheric dust, and nitrogen gas fixation. Number three is dissolved organic nitrogen, also known as DON. They are abundant in eutrophic system. For example, urea from animal excretion. Urea can change to ammonia by bacteria. Simple DON are amino sugars produced by plants. These are the impacts of land use on nitrogen concentration. Nitrate ions move easily through soils and quickly lost from land, which in contrast with phosphate or ammonium ions. Changes in vegetation of watershed caused by fires, floods, land clearing can increase nitrate level in streams. Waste discharge from fertilizers and cities increase nitrate level in streams and lake. Wetland can remove nitrate by denitrification. Ammonia is used for plant growth but it's toxic at high pH. Farm discharge ammonia excretion by animals. Factories and automobile emission will produce acid rain which consists nitric acid. This is phosphorus in aquatic ecosystem. Phosphorus is common growth limiting factor for phytoplankton in lakes. Due to the rock breakdown in watershed, releases little biologically available phosphorus. Root zone on land retain most soluble phosphorus. No gaseous phases in phosphorus cycle. Therefore, rainwater contains little phosphorus. Soluble phosphate released into water is rapidly absorbed by particles or precipitated with other compounds. Phosphorus cycle in lakes involve organic and inorganic phosphorus. Phytoplankton can only use soluble phosphate for growth. These are the importance of phosphorus. Phosphorus is essential for living organisms. It's a structural link in genetic material, also known as DNA or RNA. Phosphorus are also a source of energy for biochemical reaction. They are also components of cell walls, which consist of phospholipid membranes. This figure shows the geochemical cycle of phosphorus. Almost all of phosphorus came from rock breakdown. It is passed in an inert form to permanent sink in the sediment of large lake in the ocean. Phosphate is released by plant decomposition and is quickly taken up by living plant roots and the soil. Soluble biological available phosphate is scarce in many lakes and rivers, but sewage, they are very high, and agricultural drainage water are rich source and contribute to lake eutrophication. In some regions, the watershed and thus the streams and lakes are naturally enriched with phosphate. Recycling in the mixed layer of lakes and ocean is a major source of summer phosphate. The geochemical cycles of phosphorus is a one-way transport of withered rock fragments from land to the sediments of lakes and ocean. In lakes, three ionic forms of soluble phosphate can be found. Number one is orthophosphate. It is most common in plants. Monophosphate is in alkaline condition, and the hydrogen phosphate in acidic condition. The changes between these forms is regulated by pH. Natural lake contains only 5 to 10% of soluble phosphorus. The rest is particulate phosphorus. However, the pollution will reverse this ratio. In the watershed, phosphorus is retained by most soils. This is the phosphorus cycle and most comprehensive figure. As you can see here, these are the biologically available phosphorus, also known as orthophosphate, which is heavily used by various animals and many processes. Phosphorus can be found in organic form as living or dead biomass. Soluble and organic phosphorus are excreted by zooplankton, fish and bacterioplankton. Decomposition of dead plants and animals release phosphate and dissolve organic phosphorus. Major loss of phosphorus from open water is sedimentation of biota or chemical precipitation. Interstitial space between sediment particles, also known as microzone, is a barrier to free interchange of phosphorus between sediments and lake waters. If the microzone is anoxic, phosphate ions can pass across into lake water. If the microzone is oxygenated, phosphate ions are precipitated and do not pass freely into lake water. The amount of precipitated phosphate is also controlled by pH and redox potential. I think you already know what is redox potential. It's a reduction, oxidation, which is a measure of the tendency of a chemical species to acquire electrons and thereby be reduced. In the phosphorus recycle, there are also roles of zooplankton and fish. Zooplankton excrete about 10% of their body phosphorus per day, depend on feeding rate, temperature, food type, time, and larva stage. Half of phosphorus excreted is phosphate. The remainder is organic. Therefore, excretion is the main source of phosphate in epilimnion to support phytoplankton demand. There are also role of root macrophytes and algal decomposition. Wetland plants can modify the phosphorus cycle in lakes by transporting phosphate from sediments to open water. Macrophytes absorb phosphate from interstitial soil pore water. Phosphorus is then released to water through decaying of macrophytes plus phytoplankton and algae. There are also role of planktonic bacteria in phosphorus recycling in the water column. Bacteria are eaten by rotifers and zooplankton. And then the phosphorus of bacteria is recycled back into water column through excretion of their predators. Ecological stoichiometry is a ratios of atomic weight of different chemical elements. The average ratio of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus in water is 106:16:1. In the rate-free ratio, lower ratio can affect growth. For example, carbon stored as carbohydrate or fat increase body mass, but insufficient of nitrogen and phosphorus will affect reproduction. Nitrogen is a protein component of new material, but they can limit growth in the body mass and tissue. Phosphorus can be found in cell membrane, DNA, and RNA. They, they can limit cell division and production of new protein. Now we go to the last part. It's called toxic chemicals. Toxic chemicals can be found, and the sources are industry and agriculture. It can be detected in ground and surface waters coming from agricultural or urban watershed, for example, pesticide. Anthropogenic or man-made chemicals and heavy metals are powerful and biologically active. Pesticide may have specific target, but can also cause adverse effect at low concentration. There are three types of toxicity. Number one is acute or lethal effect. Number two is adverse sublethal effect. Number three is chronic, which is long-term effect. For the acute toxicity, it can be lethal. For the adverse sublethal effect, it can decrease growth rate and change in behavior and development. For the chronic, it's a long-term effect. There are some categories of long-term effect or chronic. For example, carcinogenic, which can cause cancer, is a teratogenic that can give adverse effect in development. Mutagenic can cause DNA mutation. Neurotoxic can cause problems in nerve function and endocrine disruptors that can interfere with hormone. Heavy metals in fresh water. Heavy metals are very low in concentration and very difficult and expensive to detect. Sources of heavy metals, it can be natural. For example, exposed bedrock of volcanoes or artificial mine refuse industrial and transportation, etc. The essential heavy metals are ferrum, copper, zinc, and molybdenum. It's a part of enzymes in plant or animals, but in high concentration, it can be toxic. For example, the concentration of ferrum limits rate of primary productivity. Molybdenum concentration limits rate of nitrogen fixation. There are also other heavy metals. For example, arsenic, cadmium, plumbum, and mercury. They are toxic and not required for normal biological activity. Aquatic macroinvertebrates can accumulate heavy metals in exoskeleton in weeks or months of exposure. For example, stonefly nymph is a bioindicator for cadmium and molybdenum. These are the anthropogenic organic chemicals. There are many chemicals here. For example, dioxin. The sources are from combustion or herbicide. There are also other anthropogenic organic chemicals, for example, PCBs or polychlorobiphenyls, pesticide, pharmaceutical, or PAH, or polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon. You can have a look to understand the sources and biological effect of these chemicals. The ecological effects of toxic chemical can occur through direct exposure or indirectly through food web. They can affect aquatic life for months, years, or centuries. For example, PCBs in fish. The zooplankton richness is also reduced by agriculture activities. For example, the herbicide called atrazine or atrazine. The effects are the production of more male daphnia and led to change in reproductive strategy. This herbicide can also interfere amphibian sexual development and can cause the forming of abnormal animals. These two terms are very important. You need to know how to differentiate between bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Many toxic chemicals are lipophilic. They are soluble in lipids and can accumulate in organisms. This is called bioaccumulation, the accumulation of toxic chemicals in the organism. For example, organic mercury or methyl-mercury. The sources, it can be natural, which is from anaerobic bacteria in bottom of ponds, and human activity from burning coal. The second process is biomagnification. This is the process of passing lipophilic toxic chemical up the food chain from prey to predator. So you have to know how to differentiate between these two, bioaccumulation and biomagnification. This figure can help you to understand more about biomagnification because biomagnification is related to the trophic level in the food chain. So the higher the level of the food chains, the magnitude of the concentration will increase. It's different by the bioaccumulation, which is related to an individual animal. This is the example of the PCB's biomagnification processes. I will explain to you in a very simple story. In this lake, the concentration of PCBs is very high that can be absorbed by the phytoplankton. After that, the phytoplankton is eaten by the zooplankton, which may increase the concentration of the PCBs. And then the zooplankton is consumed by the small fish. And then the small fish is consumed by the bigger fish. And this bigger fish is eaten by the herring. And then this herring accumulates lots of or higher concentration of PCB, which made their eggs is easy to crack. So that's the processes of biomagnification, and this is the end of this lecture. Thank you.